Should we test our microphones?
Honk, honk.
I also honk.
Tom also honks.
That's, it's better than 1-2.
Right, we get it, you're a musician.
I wanted to improve on the 1-2-1-2 earlier. I thought I'd step up my game.
That's going in before the opening theme. Shit. Hello and welcome to episode 236 of The Crate and Crowbar. It is the 20-something of April. I didn't check. My name's Chris Thurston and tonight I'm joined by Tom Francis.
Hello.
And Tom Senior.
Hello.
We're back. I always say we're back for some reason now at the beginning because I'm always surprised, but it feels like ages since we've done this because Rezzed was a week and a half ago. Mm-hmm. And since that's just how time works. That's not news. The news is entirely different.
News is we're back.
Indeed.
You better be ready.
No, so the news this week is that Campo Santo is Valve now.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Part of Valve. They
just swapped jobs. That's how I understand how this works.
Coup.
Like Gabe Newell and Eric Johnson have just sort of like stepped out to make story games, and all the guys from Campo Santo are now making Valve do.
The great, like that was the deal, but Campo Santo didn't realize that. Like they knew they'd been hired at Valve, they didn't realize everyone else at Valve is leaving. They just show up at this giant empty office like, we have to run Steam now somehow.
I appreciate that FG Brothers almost immediately, but it's weird that in the business world there isn't like a swap option. Like you got like merge and whatever, but you don't have like just like exchange these two entities functionally. Anyway, point is that Valve has, as they used to do, snaffled the team.
Yeah. It's, the Valve's thing used to be they would hire some people who made a thing and then make a sort of better souped up version of it at Valve.
Yeah.
I think it was specifically Portal and Narbacular Drop. But in this case, they are hiring everyone at Campo Santo in the middle of Valley of Gods development, and they're going to continue making Valley of Gods. I don't think with any, I haven't said anything about it, changing dramatically. And they're still going to release it, but as a Valve game. And so that's kind of the crazy thing. Like, I don't know what the timeline for Artifact is, but this might be the next Valve game. It's Valley of Gods, a first person story game about making a film in Egypt.
It's funny because like almost every Valve game that I can think of post, I guess the Steam era, whatever you'd call post like Half-Life 2 development Valve, is like pretty much the work of a team within Valve, right? Like It's not, here is the company coming together on a project. Like, the Dota 2 team is much smaller than Valve as a company, the TF2 team, etc. So when you talk about Valve game, you are really talking about these 20 to 30 to 40 to however many people at Valve and some other people who wheel past make this, you know what I mean? And that's really interesting. It's almost like an interesting kind of like state change for the game. It isn't a state change at all, but does it get considered differently now that there are these ostensibly wheelie resources available to it?
Can't hurt, right? I mean, it seems like it could only make it better if they get to keep all the creative freedom and they get to, stay being Campo Santo and writing that game and making it how they want to make it. It's pretty great that they've just got all that extra programming expertise and Valve expertise there with them. Yeah.
Will it do the Valve credits thing where no one's job titles are listed?
Yeah.
And it's just all the names of the company? Yeah.
Kind of made me think about my own presumptions about what a Valve game is, really. Because I was thinking, it's just not just a story game, but it's a story game, and Valve don't tend to make just purely story games. I always expect some sort of systemic intrigue from Valve. Something like Dota is just a huge, complex, massive systems. It's kind of a sandbox. But actually, I'm not sure where I've got that from based on all of their past, because like Valve games are very story driven. Actually, there's loads of cutscenes, there's loads of voice acting, very strong stories. Portal, a game that is so perfect it doesn't even need a story really. It has a fucking great story and great joke writing and stuff. And one of the things that I'd love to see, I like the idea that the talent in Campo Santo kind of bleed into Valve, and kind of as much as Valve's expertise bleeds back into that studio. And that, Chet Valzek has left Valve, Eric Walpole left Valve, and getting some of those really talented writers from Campo Santo back into Valve seems like a cool thing to me.
It does.
A really good thing for both companies.
I would presume that that's the incentive for this from Valve's part, right? Like, because this happens from time to time, right? Like, devs join Valve, but like, in terms of adopting a whole studio, it would make sense to me as like, we want this particular skill set in our ecosystem for whatever reason. Because obviously, you know, this is not a business decision they had to make, right? Like, there has to be a logic for them.
Yeah, it's also balancing something out. Like, maybe they've got loads of engineering expertise and loads of kind of business expertise, but lacking something.
Just like knowing how they work, they are generally most interested in people. Like, they want to hire a bunch of good people who are going to be useful long term. Valve are always thinking like 10 years ahead. And so they really want a whole load of people. And so when they like buy a team like this or buy a game and hire the team, it's the team they're probably more interested in than, it's not like they thought, shit, Valley of Gods are going to make $1 billion. We must buy the rights to that game.
Yeah.
So
we're going to save our flagging retail business.
Yeah. It's, it'll be really interesting to see how well it does do actually. Cause, you know, Firewatch was a big hit. They're definitely like, you know, one of the most successful indie developers, but of course a big hit for an indie is completely insignificant in Valve's terms. Obviously, it being a Valve game will massively increase its exposure. I wonder how much.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, what position it then occupies on Steam. Like, you basically, you have to, even though it's been considered this way until now, it has to stop being considered an indie game.
Yeah.
Like, it can't be. You can't make an indie game, like, and be, like, have it published and produced with all of Valve's resources behind it. Like, if that's the case, what does indie mean? Like, already a strained concept in some ways.
I think it'll be really interesting when that game is done, because I want to know, we won't find out for years, but I want to know what that team do afterwards. Do they stay as a team and make another thing like that? Or do they completely disperse and all join other Valve projects? Or do a bunch of Valve people join onto them? And
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, it reminds me a lot of, like, that run of years, 10 plus years ago now, where Valve picked up a lot of mod teams that then in some cases found homes elsewhere. Sometimes, like, thinking of, is it Turtle Rock?
Yeah.
Did Left 4 Dead.
Yeah.
Like, there's like, you know, there's that history of them sort of like adopting a particular group. And there is also a history of those groups kind of sticking together in some way or not, you know, that like, or just, you know, or stick around within the team, or like certain aspects of people's aspects staying and some going. But it feels like that kind of mid-sized indie studio with a hit under their belt is like, to this decade or this era or whatever, what like the maker of the most successful Half-Life 1 mod was in the late 90s, right? Like, it's like talent without all of the resources it could potentially have. But that just means a very different thing now.
Like if those Battle Royale armor mods were happening in that, you know, in Valve's past, like about a decade ago, that's exactly the sort of thing you could see Valve snapping up and just making themselves, right?
Yeah.
But it definitely does seem to have changed. Yeah. And it's got me excited about Valve again, between that and Artifact, which I'm really excited about playing.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. But that was the thing, right? Them just revealing that they had kidnapped Richard Garfield.
Right. We've got him, everybody.
No one realized he was missing, but here he is.
Got him in the talent bunker.
Like, that was, that makes that super exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. Like, I'm happy for those guys. I know some of them from Dota International's past. So, you know, it's just nice to kind of see that kind of journey reach a conclusion. That makes it sound like they've gone into the West to remain Galadriel, which is not what I mean. But you know what I mean? Like, it's nice to see kind of, I guess, that talent recognized. And you're right, Tom, it's nice to see Valve actively seek that particular kind of talent, because it has nothing to do with AR or VR or, you know, not to disparage those things necessarily, but like, presumably that's not the team you get if what you're making is like more apps, right? Or like a freaky controller. We should talk about what everyone's been playing. Tom, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, kind of, because I want to talk about the Ludum Dare stuff, which is, I haven't played any of it.
Okay, well,
I just wanted to,
things you've been thinking about.
Yeah. So the Ludum Dare is this, 2-day game making competition that happens every year, Podcast Voice. And the theme this year was combine two incompatible ideas. And so I've just been watching, a bunch of entries, that have come out of that. And I'm going to play some of these, but I haven't played any yet. Most of these were brought to my attention by, a Twitter user by the name of Trassavol Dog. And that's a good person to follow if you want to see cool games. But one, is called Sheet Music Editor Shoot 'em Up, in which you seemingly play as, I want to say, Tom, you know music. Is that a single clef or?
Yeah, that's treble clef.
Treble clef.
So you're on 5 lines. It looks like there are crotchets fighting. It's like a side-scrolling shoot 'em up in which you're a crotchet.
Yeah.
Going from level
Quadra-clef. Multi-clef.
And you, like the lines that normally, separate out to the notes, scales, what? Are bouncy ropes that you bounce onto to dodge some
the dangly music
fighters.
Gentleman.
Yeah, the dangly music gentleman. So that's amazing. Then there's Crash Crops, which is a breakout style game where when your ball goes past the bricks, which are a bunch of rocks, it arrives in some fertile ground where everything it passes through is like corn, and it grows the corn one stage as it passes through them. And then when you bounce through corn multiple times, you grow it into a crop and I guess harvest it.
It's like breakout, but farming.
Yeah. And then there's turn-based asteroid snake roguelike, which is side-scrolling snake-type player avatar. You're a snake that you kind of move around in 4 directions, and your tail follows behind you. But you're dodging asteroids that are coming from the left, and they only move when you do in the roguelike style. Then there is Peace with an @ sign for the A, where I guess I don't see an explanation of what this combines, but it looks to me like it combines roguelike ASCII, or rogue, I guess, ASCII graphics with a platformer. So you play as the @ symbol, but you're jumping around and like wall jumping on things, and there's screen shake and all these effects piled on top of the ASCII. And then there's Gone Vroom, which is a racing game plus walking simulator. It appears to be just Gone Home, but you're a car.
Fabulous.
And is it a race in that context?
I don't know.
Are you just a car?
I can't tell. The screenshot is just the front gate from Gone Home, but just a giant car.
Yeah. Actually, when you play it twice in a time trial, that's when you get the ghost.
Of course, New Game Plus.
Yep. So that all seems amazing, and I'm sure there's more cool stuff there.
I'll put links to all of those things in the show notes. Thanks, Tom, for doubling the length of those show notes.
No worries.
In a single 2-minute run.
Those are all ones I've retweeted, so the links are all on my my Twitter account if you need this.
Yeah, Ludum Dare's always been super cool. I used to rely on it really heavily for filling out the download section of the Back of PC Gamer back in the day 7 years ago.
Yeah. Sometimes the themes I don't like. It's voted on, the theme. And that tends to favor themes that just suggest one particular game. Like there'll just be one about like you're always running out of power or something like that. And you can tell it ignites a lot of people's imaginations, but they're all thinking of the same game.
Right, yeah.
And then inevitably, when the entries come in, there are shitloads of takes on the same thing. Whereas this one I really like because it's like, seems like everyone had a different idea for what the 2 incompatible things should be.
It's a really good, it's just a really good idea. It's basically, I think there's pretty much the same, criteria for like a good Ludum Dare game jam idea as there is for like a really good podcast question. where it's like, cause you're right, where not everyone has the same answer to it, right? Like where it is this sort of like what if kind of.
Oh, that reminds me, when we get to questions, I have a question.
Okay. Sure. You can ask it now if you like. Or do you want to do it properly during?
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah,
that's the question. Let's go for it. Yeah, let's do questions from Tom.
Format.
Oh my god.
200 episodes in, we should do it.
Okay, so in Far Cry 5, there's a dog companion, and it'll apparently, I've never actually seen it do this, but apparently it'll sometimes go out and pick up weapons for you and bring them to you. I don't want it to do that at all. What I want it to do is go and get my arrows from enemies. Right. So the question is, what service would you like a pet in a game to provide for you that currently they don't?
Ooh. Interesting. I mean, Torchlight did the best one, which was to go and sell your shit, at local, back in town and come back to you with a profit without skimming any of it, as far as you know.
That's really good. I would like the dog that barks codex entries at me so I don't have to read them. Yeah. The aquarium.
The Deckard Cain dog.
Yeah, exactly. The law dog.
I'd like the dog.
Doggard Cain.
Deckard Cain's going to be in Heroes of the Storm, and one of his special abilities is called Lornado, which is brilliant. That's a bit of side news there, a bit of bonus news. The dog I would like is if you're in a stealth game and you're crouching behind a cupboard or some shit, and you're just slowly waiting for a dude to do his really long circuitous route, just so you can jump out and get him. I just want a little terrier that goes and just harries them really quickly around that route, just to get them there faster. Just deploy a little terrier, just nips at their heels, just gets them around faster, then blam, stab.
To get you the window faster.
That's
really
right. Yeah.
Patrol route accelerating terrier.
Man, there's a lot in that idea.
Maybe like a time terrier, just fast forwards time itself to make this happen.
Essentially, yeah, but you make it look like a thing a dog might be able to do. Just really fast barking, everything speeds up.
So a lot of small dogs do have a very high pitched bark as if it's been sped up.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah,
so it makes
Beagles.
sense.
Yeah. I feel like there's going to be some good uses for birds. Birds are getting better and better in games. This is one thing, a big trend in the last 4 or 5 years.
Better birds.
Birds have been picking up the slack. We've got binocular birds we've got Assassin's Creed, just fly across the entire fucking world with a bird. Birds are just on top. They're doing so well, but it feels like
Birds are on top.
They should, there's so much untapped potential there for something they could swoop down and steal a guy's hat. Or,
That's it. Just think. Sure, you can fly across all of ancient Egypt, but think bigger. Think hats.
What if?
I would actually love any kind of animal that could run out and drag the body of the person I just killed to a secluded place.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Or eat it wholesale, I guess.
Just ignore it, yeah.
Yeah, because most of the sort of obvious sort of animal verbs are accounted for, right? Kill, sniff.
I just remembered Dishonored has rats that can eat corpses for you.
That's true.
That's kind of covered.
Yeah, that is lethal though. That is strictly lethal. I think I don't know, the dog that just sort of charms an enemy for you, rather than the lethal takedown, just the non-lethal dog takedown, which is where it's oh, who's this? Who are you doing? That version of it would be great. Even if it just temporarily help, maybe it's the opposite of the time terrier, that it kind of it doesn't accelerate the guard around the path. It freezes them in a particular spot for a long time.
Yeah, it's like that Dishonored 2 power, which is kind of like a mesmerized thing where there's just a twisting fragment of
but it's a dog.
glass. But it's just a golden retriever. It's just a lovely retriever.
Can you, so you could probably do almost all of the Dishonored 2's powers with dogs. Domino is just whatever you do to someone, the dog does to someone else.
Pushes him off a cliff. Go, lassie, fuck him up.
Doggimo. Good question, Tom.
Yeah.
Thanks. Should write in more often.
Yep, that's it, listeners. Up your game.
Just ask questions about what a dog do. That's it. So I know, Tom, you and I have been playing the same games.
We have. I've been playing less of them than you, Chris. I played about a couple of hours of each, but you've completed both.
Yeah. And reviewing both. So that's why I did that, because I had to. Also because I enjoyed it. So, and a through line here is that both the games that we'll talk about, and they're basically probably the two big things coming out this week are Battletech and Frostpunk. And both of them have stuck in my mind. Maybe this is because where my head's been anyway, but both of them to me really feel like successful adaptations of tabletop experiences as much as they feel like games. Because maybe we start with Battletech, because so this is the Mech Warrior strategy, turn-based strategy game. Mech Warrior XCOM is the easiest and quickest way to explain it.
XCOM, got it.
Yeah, I've used that on 2 separate PC Gamer articles because there's no better big word for it than that. There just isn't. I was looking forward to it a really long time, and I really like it. I think it's obviously of interest to everyone here, because turn-based tactics games with a persistent element, we all like them a great deal. But there are a few things that make it feel quite different. One is the fact that it doesn't use a grid, has a sort of movement, value-based movement system and true line of sight. And very granular, what can hit see what and when kind of stuff. It's enormously granular generally in terms of how its combat system links together, very much about like facings and positioning and heat and stability and different weapons firing, having different optimal ranges and kind of, trying to basically like, push the odds in your favor over the course of a battle where the environment has an effect, but when a fight is joined, cover isn't the be all and end all. Like there's like, it's an interesting strategy game, for me because it deals with these massive robots. You're not doing the XCOM thing of like, if I am ever not fully behind a small wall, I'm probably fucked. It has a lot more granularity in how safety is achieved, and that in turn opens up like, it's not just that weapons are effective at different ranges, it's that like different mechs and different pilots even have different ways of putting themselves in a safe position, which is, I think, if I had to drill down like one system in a very, very, very systemsy game, that's both the thing that I like the most about it and also actually the thing that reminds me the most of tabletop war games, because it feels like there isn't like an absolute, like an XCOM, which feels more, feels more board game-ish or something. Like, it feels more, digital, that kind of relationship between, like, I'm in cover, I'm not.
Yeah.
Whereas Battletech has a really kind of fluid system for, like, for example, if you move a long way on your turn, you get loads of stacks of something called evasion, which basically makes you much harder to hit. But if you have the right perks and you don't move at all, you gain both entrenched and guarded, which makes you take half damage from the front and, makes you much harder to knock over. So depending on the pilot and the situation in the mech, it's like, it's far less obvious, like, what the exact right play is, or it's not like always a given that like the right thing to do in this situation is to attempt to flank, for example. It comes down to granular details of loadout and skill training and stuff. And that's really neat. I really like that about it. What's your experience been like so far, Tom?
Yeah, I really like it a lot. I think it's really, really, really good. I like that just, it feels so different to it's right to compare it to XCOM on a like a surface level, but it's such a different kind of feeling game, particularly because it tends to be about, you're only controlling like 4 mechs, but what those 4 mechs can do, you get to personalize like to a great extent in like the bits in between the tactical battles. You're running a kind of mercenary ship and, you have to kind of take jobs to earn money and use that to refit your mechs. And you're also earning salvage from the battlefield. And the whole meta is super fucking good, actually. I really like
it's really good.
Yeah, the kind of risk reward of going for more money or less money and taking salvage, and a lot of the kind of gambles that you take to keep your little business. It's like a business management game outside of the actual, tactics game. But the tactics game is great because it feels so different to other stuff like XCOM. And it's kind of, I feel like it hasn't just resolutely kowtowed to XCOM's example. It's gone its own way and stayed very faithful to the Battletech universe and the Battletech war game. And that means, a lot of randomization, a lot of kind of granular dice rolling against specific bits of mechs, and a very unusual damage system whereby you're trying to chip away at armor to compromise the internal structure. And once the internal structure is revealed, then other weapons can be used to exploit that, and you're looking for critical hits on certain bits of body parts to actually eliminate them and blow bits off. And this is, this cuts both ways, because obviously your mechs can be equally affected by that. If someone kind of uses a load of rockets to strip away bits of armor, they could get a lucky shot that hits an ammo dump that just obliterates the mech. Like, very unlucky, but it can happen. You have to know that and work around it. So that involves even just turning your mech sideways, so your undamaged side is presented to the enemy. It's like, that's the level of kind of detail you're using to actually move your guys around the battlefield. And there's great stuff like, you've got long range missiles that can go over mountains, but only if you've got a spotter. So if you have these little mechs who run around, and they gain evasion for running around, which makes them harder to hit, and that's how they defend themselves. But you can run one round into some woods, and if they've got, eyes on one mech, you can volley like loads of rockets over a mountain to hit him, and that stuff's just really satisfying and really exciting and feels very different to XCOM.
There's some interesting stuff because like hit chances are random. So it goes back to the sort of the dice roll thing, which I know that the sort of like, is that fun? Is it not fun? That's but what, like a war game, I think, or like a tabletop war game, it has that thing of like, there's always a way of playing or positioning or making decisions better to make sure that the shots you do get are useful, which is one thing, right? Like, you can be in a situation, particularly late game when you have the assault mechs, which are massive and have, you might have like a dozen weapons on a mech. And so not all of them are going to have a good chance to hit all of the time. But you'll probably be able to put yourself in situations where if you set things up right, when you get that deep in the initiative order, you're looking at like 90 plus chances to hit with everything. But then you've got like loads of interesting abilities that sort of encourage you to not see those percentage chances as such a loss. Like, if you invest skill points in the gunnery tree, you get the multi-shot ability, which means that you can designate multiple targets and then divide your weapons up to your heat limit between as many targets as are valid, which means that you can be in a situation where your mech with the cool long-range missiles has closed to close range or had something close to close range with them, and they can shoot that thing with all their medium missiles, but still volume missiles over the hill at something else. Because, yeah, your percent chance to hit with those long-range missiles at close range might have dropped significantly, but you can actually like try and engineer a situation where I have an enemy at range 1 and an enemy at range 3, and I can be maximally efficient, which is the most satisfying thing about it.
Yeah, the weapons themselves are really interesting as well. They've got lots of different kind of, so if missiles don't cause a lot of heat when you fire them, lasers cause loads of heat. But missiles require ammo, and you need to have salvage ammo or buy it. So you could go for like a massive laser build, and they'll do really well on an ice planet, because on ice planets you don't heat up as much. Or if you go into, if there's a map with a big river, if you go into a river and then fire lasers, the game takes that into account and says, okay, you're in a wet, cold place, so actually the heat is going to be dispersed into your surroundings. Like, it's that detailed with its stuff. So if you want to go like full laser on an ice planet, you can do that, or you could have a mix. Ideally you want to mix, really, but yeah.
Do lasers refract when they move from a different substrate, like from water to air?
No.
Shit.
I'm asking as much in real life as I am in the game. I don't know if that's actually what lasers
underwater,
do.
So that would not actually occur. You basically, you paddle.
Right.
You do like a heat dispersing paddle.
I actually don't know if in real life whether lasers refract. Normal light does, but
yeah,
maybe lasers are special.
Do you not know?
Tell us.
Yeah, write in. Let us
know. Or test it. Don't test it.
Yeah, it's
a
really
safe environment to test it.
I appreciate like describing these things. Like, this is what's so exciting to me about it, is that it's so granular and so many interesting kind of systems at work, and it's consistently, I think, satisfying to try and turn situations to your advantage. The AI is like good, but in a single-minded way, and it plays like you do. Like, it does the thing where it focuses your weakest mech as much as it can.
Yeah.
And that initially can seem quite single-minded until you realize that that's how all players play strategy games. Sure. Like, you pick a target and you keep shooting at that thing and trying to exploit its weaknesses until that's dead, because that's more, but what's interesting about that is it means that, like, it's very difficult. Like, I played 50 hours of Mexcom, of Battletech, finished the campaign, it keeps going, but, and I have like had a kind of perfect finish once, like a no repair bills incurred, kind of like nobody hurt, win once. And it was a mission that I was arguably probably a little bit overpowered for, because I'd salvaged a really good mech in the previous one. And that's really promising to me. I think the one thing I wanted to bring up about it, again, in the context of XCOM, but not in a way that it's really drag XCOM at all, so much just to say that, like, a problem that all games like this have is, how do you keep the difficulty curve interesting over time?
That's true.
And I definitely got to a point where, like, I was more comfortable than I was at the start, which is still the kind of weird backwards difficulty curve of these kinds of games. So, but it sustains, like, I think it has a much better curve than particularly, XCOM on Enemy Unknown, Enemy Within did, where it, like, I always found those games have an issue with being, like, extremely punishing and then suddenly fine. Whereas, I would say that, Battletech starts off, like, asking you to make some hard decisions. And it does ramp up, and then it maybe shelves off a bit in terms of how difficult it gets when you get the best stuff in the game. And you have enough upgrades and space that you can kind of rotate things in and out and afford to do that. But like on the way there, you go through a much more kind of like long running and interesting kind of, relationship with, the outcomes of each mission. It's far less, it's got a really nice kind of soft fail system where as long as you complete a single objective in a mission, you can withdraw from it and get a good faith failure, which gets you partial payment. It means you probably don't take a reputation hit with the people who hired you. It depends exactly what you do, but you can take a kind of, you can take a loss, but it's really a win, which is like, kind of what I want from these kinds of games. Like, traditionally, retreating is just failing. Like,
yeah. So in XCOM, it's, you can retreat, but, it's basically about protecting your losses basically and just saying, I just can't afford to lose any more soldiers, but you're certainly not getting any benefits from that. Like you're not even getting any scrap from the battlefield or anything. Though I have like, I think all my problems with Battletech so far have just been quite minor things. Some of the scenarios aren't great, I think, in terms of, I think there's an escort scenario that is like quite boring, where it's just about, some trucks driving from one bit to another and you've got to run your mechs with them. There's several turns of just kind of running them alongside and not much happening. I've had that mission bug out as well once, and a couple of crashes, just a little bit of instability, nothing too bad. The biggest problem I think as a new player is simply the onboarding stuff, particularly around the interface. Yeah. Because the interface is actually very good once you understand what's going on. It's actually very good at telling you, there's huge amounts of information to actually give you about what's going on, what the fuck is happening with each mech. Like how hot is it? How unstable is it? Like if you take loads of kind of missile damage or artillery damage, you can be knocked over or, be at risk of toppling. And if you fall over, people basically get free targeted shots at bits of you.
Yeah.
And,
you basically bullying.
Yeah. So you can send a mech to go and kick another mech over, and then you can try and shoot them in the head. And, headshots are amazing in, Battletech, because if you take out the head, you basically just kill the pilot and you get to salvage the rest of that shit.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So there's that risk reward as well to it, which is rad. And that's like, that, I've done it once and it feels so good. It's so good when that happens. But yeah, scenarios and basically just its tutorials are buried in conversations that you have on your ship with your crewmates.
Yeah.
And there isn't just a screen that shows you the interface icons and says, this is what this bar is, this is what this bar is, this is what this bit means, this is why these blocks are orange, this is why they're sometimes grey. And this is all the stuff that you just sort of have to fucking figure out. And I had to go onto Steam forums and stuff to find out.
There is a quite well hidden, like, question mark on the mech base specifically.
Right.
That explains a lot of mech internal system stuff.
Okay.
But like, that system isn't used anywhere else, and it does feel like they're trying to, like, it's funny because I think its strength as an adaptation of that source material is that, like, I came to it with having played MechWarrior since I was a kid and was like, I know what everything is. I'm in Candyland, and also the logic sustains across games. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to have like a strategy game that uses so much the same logic as a first person vehicle combat game that you can just play it, and as soon as you get it handle on its particular way of doing things. But you're right, like, there's definitely a hill to climb.
It just needs I mean, I'd have to go hunting for that screen. If it's a small icon in the mech.
Top left of the mech base screen.
Cause there's a lot of, that's one of the busier screens as well. Yep. That's where you manage all of your armaments and stuff. And as I say, the interface is quite efficient once you actually understand what's going on. It does the great thing of, when you're moving your mech, you move to various dots and the colours of the dots show what cover it is if you're in a forest or something like that. But it also draws lines to enemy mechs and says whether you're going to be able to hit them or not, which is the thing XCOM always desperately needed, which is also in Phoenix Point incidentally. Yeah.
It's super good.
Yeah, it's like great, isn't
when you mouse over a potential destination from your mech, it will highlight, in 3 different ways, whether your mech will have a shot with indirect weapons, which is kind of like a parabola kind of thing, whether your mech will have a shot with direct weapons. For either of those cases, whether or not the shot is obstructed at any point by any form of, like, cover, and whether or not other mechs will have line of sight to your mech, but you will not have sufficient degree of torso rotation to rotate to shoot them back. And it does that with like 3 different types of line. Yeah. That's super intuitive when you know what it is.
Yeah. This sounds like, did you hear about, Jake Solomon talking about the abandoned, things for XCOM where they called it the barber pole system, where they tried to do more or less this, where like every potential position you go to, draw a line to every enemy you could or couldn't shoot. And the lines tried to reflect both if you could shoot them and if they could shoot you. So half the line was about what they could do and half the line was about what you could do. And they were striped if it was like in cover and, yeah,
it's pretty similar. Yeah.
He looks back at that as like a terrible failure and like, thank God we ditched that terrible system.
It's interesting because like it's quite similar in fucking hell.
Mexico.
Because like, but it's, I think it doesn't need to be that complicated. It's like, if it's a red line, you can shoot each other. If it's a dotted white line, they can shoot you. Because you don't need, really, you can shoot them, they can't shoot you. Like, that's probably not that important. There's another thing that will indicate if it's a flanking attack, but that's more dependent on them, on what they're doing. Because there is no real such thing as a flanking attack. Rear armor is almost always weaker, but like, and it's almost always better, but it's not like, XCOM, particularly the Firaxis XCOM games, are like, there's so much about flanking attacks. Like, if there's like a single most important, like, if you say that Into the Breach is about pushing and damage, those XCOM games are about flanking attacks.
Yeah, totally.
Like, all of, Battletech's difficulty curve is in service of the fact that, like, it's such a weird it's a game about fictional vehicles. Like, it's a game about vehicles that have really intense internal logic, and some of it makes sense, but it is fictional logic. Like, it's not real. But that fake logic sustains a really interesting sort of strategic sandbox with loads of options, because they can take advantage of the fact that you're not commanding people. You're commanding these kind of mad vehicles that work in a really specific way.
Yeah. This thing I enjoyed about Phoenix Point, which I mentioned on the previous pod, where changing states of damage on tough enemies creates an evolving tactical situation on the battlefield. So it's not like that thing's dead or it isn't. Either can fully attack or not. You've got this thing where you blow an arm off. If, it doesn't have the laser attack or the missile attack that you care about, you can bank it and just ignore it and salvage it later. And also there's the damage your guys take. You can eject any of your dudes at any time to save your guy and leave your mech behind. There are times when you might want to do that. There are times you want to just retreat a mech behind a hill and just have them barrage. But you're always kind of changing your roles on the fly, reacting to this changing battlefield state. And XCOM wasn't always like that. Like, XCOM is kind of so brutal and so kind of lethal that you either lose a thing or you don't. It's very, you're not really doing much changing on the fly, really.
I think this is what's so successful about it for me, is the way that stuff all happens in the context of a battle, and then the way those battles link into the strategic layer, the meta layer, in a very granular way. Like, it has a fail state, which is if you can't pay the bills for a given month. And often that just means finish the mission. Just, you have to win. Yeah. And I find that that's a really interesting pressure, because, like, there are ways of winning more or less. Like, you can do missions might have secondary objectives, and secondary objectives will increase the payout. But if this is like 2 days till payday, 2 days till the bills come in, and you need just the basic amount of money from this mission and you're on your last legs, then any victory that gets you through just enough is probably good enough. You know what I mean? And there is a pressure, there is a reward for min-maxing and getting through perfectly, but it's so hard to achieve that it feels almost unrealistic, which is a really good place to be, where it's like you're succeeding enough that you keep going, but you'll keep going with setbacks. You're not getting the kind of like, I have a perfect team and I never suffer negative consequences, and when I do, I reload a save thing that like late game Enemy Within, for example, gets, where it's like, oh, I'm just not going to bother with this outcome. Yeah. Like, I've had examples where, like, so there is a few things you can sort of game. Like, you have a player character that you make at the start and they can't die for plot reasons. They can be very seriously wounded. And my, Space Me spent like the first year of my Battletech campaign pretty much on the bench. But the reason for that would be because I would put them in scout mechs, because sometimes scout mech pilots just get fucked up. Like, that just happens sometimes. And so they're quite a safe person to put in that. Not safe, but like, it's not like you put loads of time into training them and now they're dead. And like, you do and that kind of encourages you into these kind of like cool kind of like sacrifice plays and things where like, if we don't finish this mission, we can't pay the bills, the game ends. So I'm going to do a jump jet attack with my scout mech onto a big mech, which is normally kind of suicide, but like, it's worth it in this particular scenario because you fuck up both mechs and it allows you to just kind of crawl through by the skin of your teeth. And then you kind of keep that result, because finding a different mission to run is impractical. And it was good enough to get you onto the next kind of month. And maybe that's enough to get you to the next thing. And I found that really gratifying, particularly in the first half of the game, where it's like, you don't really have any choice but to win this mission. So any success is a win. You know what I mean? So you take more on and you accept. I found myself, even though there is no Iron Man mode, naturally playing like that. Yeah,
I found that too. I think part of that was because the missions can be very long. And one thing I would love for the game, there are options you can turn off in terms of skipping animations and stuff like that. But even then, the option to play at a faster clip would be great. I mean, I'd love to do a mission in 20 minutes, because sometimes you're just doing missions to pay the bills, and sometimes they're quite easy. Like, you take like a deliberately easy mission, you just want to top things up and make sure you want to get those upgrades on. And you want to be able to bash through those. You don't want to spend like an hour just like fiddling around with stuff.
Yeah,
just some sort of like little ability to control the pace a bit for those lesser missions.
Like, nice. I've seen the completely animations too long. I didn't find them to be so, but I agree that there are fiddly moments. Like, it's sometimes inconsistent. It's quite good, for example, at like saying, if you complete all the objectives on a mission and you've killed everything, it will just skip the bit where it asks you to then run to the extraction point. It'll just say, don't worry about it, you're done. Like, we'll just get you from, it literally someone says like, I can pick you up from there, don't worry about it. But like, you're sometimes in a scenario where like one turret survived in a corner of the map, and you can gamble on running to kill that turret and hoping it's the last thing, or you can just run to the extraction point and you get these kind of like slightly unsatisfactory 5 minutes of jogging moments.
Yeah, the jogging moments, because the game snaps into kind of interleaved turn-based when enemies are within radar range. But between that, you're just taking it in turns to jog your mechs across the battlefield. And actually, if you're being super optimal, you want to be moving them. You don't want to be sprinting them, because you want to be moving them, then putting them in defensive posture in case an enemy kind of comes onto the radar. So actually, if you're playing super optimally, you're actually, those bits are super slow and really, really not great.
Yeah, I found that for the most part you can get away with sprinting.
Yeah.
Because you often get like a turn before the turn to kind of like unscrew up your positioning. But yeah.
I often find it's, because the scouts are so much faster that you have to basically keep them back a bit. Yeah, because if they overstretch, they can get totally fucked if they encounter the enemy first, which is tactically sensible. It's just a kind of ball ache to engineer that.
It works a lot better, or like it's a lot less of a pronounced issue. And this is something that like I feel is true for the game generally, and it speaks to where the design happened. But there is a skirmish mode, which is also the multiplayer mode, where you build a lance of mechs up to a money limit, basically, which is basically a point system. This is where it feels really Warhammer-y to me. And then you play in a way where like you will get each team on radar within a turn. Like there's almost no fog of war because the maps are small enough that you will encounter each other quickly. It's a fight, and it's still interesting at that range. Like, you know, the radar system is important, but it's still interesting when you don't have it. It's all about effective use of ranges and positioning and counterplays and things. Yeah. And in that mode, it feels a lot like the tabletop game.
Yeah,
like
interesting.
It's mostly the kind of sprints between objectives in single player missions that, and campaign missions that have that issue.
Do love stamping on tanks though.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah, sometimes they try and take on your like massive skyscraper size mechs with just a normal tank, and they'll send like 2 at a time, and then you send your little assault mech that's really fast, and you just run up and he stamps on them and they explode, and it's great.
If you jump on another mech, where do you both end up? Are you both like on the same position at the end of that, or do you fall off them?
It's not a great animation. You jump next to them pretty much, and then they have a chance to take damage. Jumping attacks do a potentially colossal amount of damage to your own legs. So that's why jumping,
fair enough.
It depends on the relative weight. So like, that's why jumping a light mech, they do a lot of stability damage as well. So like jumping a light mech onto a big mech to knock it over.
Yeah, as well.
If you don't want to keep the small mech, like, because the small mech will probably fall over from that as well, because of the amount of damage it'll do to its legs. But it's like, that's the sort of like, get down sir kind of like sacrifice play. There's so much stuff I really like about it. Like, I really like its initiative system, which means that different mech, based on the weight of the mech, usually, and its pilot, mechs are assigned a kind of a slot out of 5 slots in the initiative order. And then those initiative slots happen in sequence. And then when multiple mechs share the same slot, players take it in turn to activate one of them. So if all of your mechs and all their mechs are in the same initiative column, then everyone just takes it in turns to pick a mech and activate it. Yeah. It's an I go, you go thing. But, you have the option to like be faster if you're a scout mech or something and go first, which it has some upsides and downsides, but also certain abilities and being knocked over can push you deeper in the order. So if you can knock someone over early in the round,
so like sink down, So
this is just the kind of, it's like, you know, maybe this is boring if people aren't super into strategy design, but like the kind of like headspace this puts you in is like, if I do jump my little mech, because it'll activate first, into that big mech and knock it over, that big mech is now going to be on the ground until everything else I've got has had a chance to fire. And because it's on the ground, I can take those called shots at its head or legs or arms, and that's worth it. I've decided that's worth it. And then the reason that's interesting is because doing that will probably wreck the light mech. I might lose the pilot. I'll probably lose its legs. Either way, I'm paying for those repairs after this battle. It's not like your pilots can spend time in med bay, which isn't very interactive, but like, unlike XCOM, there's that real kind of like cost benefit thing of like, if I expose my left flank here, my good, rare, you know, triple plus upgraded long range missile launcher is on that left arm. If I take damage specifically there is a greater than 0 chance that it gets blown up, and I don't have another one. That's a really nice kind of tension when you want to face this way, but maybe it's not the right thing to do at that moment. Like, it
simulates everything that's cool about mechs.
Yeah.
That's why
that's all it really, that's all it really needed to do, to be honest.
Yeah. Job done. I like it a lot.
So yeah, I'm a big fan as well.
Still have really fond memories of MechWarrior 2 way back in the day. Yeah. There's something, I think the thing it captured for me that I haven't really had before or since is, you always felt like you're in a vehicle, and that the world outside is this hostile alien place that you could never go out into. And it just felt very technical, you know, that thing about all systems nominal and stuff. And gearing out your mech to take into account how much heat you're going to build up and, how good of a heat sink you have. And also it just had this very work-like aspect to the missions, which it sounds like maybe Battletech has as well, where there was a dust-off zone you had to get to, and sometimes it just felt very routine. It was just like, we're just going to land on this planet, we're going to go out, just stick to the waypoints, do the job, take out these really fairly trivial enemies, and then get to the dust-off zone and do it, because that's our job. Like, it wasn't necessarily the most interesting challenge, it was just,
I think
felt like
the absence of apocalyptic kind of stress on if you don't do this, the world ends, is actually really nice for this system, because you are just running a business, like Tom said, you know, it is your job for that minute is to go in and do the best job that you can. Sometimes your legs get blown off.
That's good. All sorts of fond memories of MechWarrior 2, actually. Just how bleak and desert-like the planets were. Such a cool part of it,
Yeah, I do think, it does feel, because because you see battles from above, it does, even when you're seeing the close-up cinematic shots, it's not the most modern looking game, and, I think they do look quite toyish, the mechs, they don't have the same sort of sense of size. I think it's something, a weakness of the game is that it doesn't escalate very much, and that's because you are always commanding for a lance of 4 mechs, and you are always a mercenary commander. So in the course of the single player campaign, you do take part in epic implied planetary sieges and things, but it's a bit like Mass Effect. There's always something that needs 4 people exactly to do. You know what I mean? There's always a communications installation that needs taking out, or a distraction that needs to be launched, or a VIP that needs to be extracted while the battle is happening somewhere else on your comms. So it struggles to there's a few ways it kind of gestures at what it could be in the long run. What's the version of this where you also have supporting forces, where you're not the only lance on the field, that kind of thing, where it's it could escalate more. I think also, it might be worth, I wanted to pause briefly to talk about so it has these sort of light RPG mechanics, you do encounter events, your crew falling out with each other. However, some of them didn't even, I saw a screenshot, I think it was on Rob Zachney's review for Waypoint, about 2 of your pilots getting into a fight because they're of different social class. Didn't happen at all in 50 hours. I've never seen it. And actually I commented on that in the review, and I know something bugged for me. I never saw anything like that.
No.
I had the same event about a beeping noise in the bridge, twice. But not a lot of that stuff. It didn't seem to use those systems, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah. Because it's got a surprisingly in-depth kind of character creator. You get to choose your origin, where you're from in the universe.
It comes up every now and then, but you are pretty much strictly on rails. You have conversation trees with characters.
Yeah.
But if you're from a particular place, then when that place comes up in conversation, you have the option to say, I'm from there. But it doesn't change the plot at all.
Yeah.
And actually the way you choose to comport yourself, if it has, it sort of says that it's kind of about whether or not you're a pure mercenary or whether you believe in something, but that doesn't manifest in any meaningful way in terms of consequences at all, which is a bit of a shame. There are some nice things, it's really nice it feels like it's, consciously trying to be a more modern sort of game in some ways, and to do things right, basically. So, little things that, well, they're not little, but not a lot of games do them. It allows you to pick your pronoun, separate from, your avatar, which is a really nice touch that doesn't, it doesn't cost anything to implement. And it's you can pick he, she, or they, and any avatar you like when you're making a character. There's no reason not to do that. It's just a nice little inclusion.
Yeah.
It's a nice cast of characters in other ways. They don't do much, but it's a cool gang of people. The randomly generated squad mates are a mixed bunch to some extent. I got very attached to an extremely good artillery pilot called Lovely Leonard. Her first name was Lovely and her second name was Leonard. But that's a great example of Heatsig style kind of name generation accident.
Yeah.
Lovely Leonard was killed in a particularly climactic planetary assault And I couldn't imagine like my like captain, the space captain, me shouting anything other than lovely. I had a guy who died eventually, but it was just the most inexplicably terrible like New Yorker voice. Like, I'm walking here, but like that as his like movement bark. Like I didn't understand. Like absolutely inexplicable. But then that's very good.
It's good. I like it.
We've both also played Frostpunk.
We have played Frostpunk.
Is that this week?
So, Tom, do you know what Frostpunk is?
Yes.
So let's pretend you don't. And now, what would you guess Frostpunk was from the name Frostpunk?
A thing about ice elementals, who are in a band and, are making alternative music.
Shit, I knew that answer would be good. That's why I asked it. It's so good.
It sounds like, that sounds like an Adventure Time, like plot point.
Yeah.
So imagine that, but the world has gone to hell and there is no music anymore and there's a
lot of sad violin.
There's a lot of sad violins, I suppose. That's the one music that exists. But no one gets to hear it in the settlements in the icy wastes north of London or in some sort of inexplicable post-apocalypse where, humanity is dying out and everything is becoming icy and shit. And there are no punks anymore because everyone has to, work so hard they lose their limbs and has to be moved into hospices and then, either just left to die or, rehabilitated with artificial limbs that don't work very well. And all the while your resources are dwindling and, all your people are dying and eventually they just get sick of you and throw you out.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's a good game. Would you pay for that experience as a game?
I read Chris Livingston's review, which he gave it 89% and loved it. And everything he said in its favour made me think, I don't want to play this. It sounds awful. It was just like, even when you do a good job, all your citizens hate you for it and decide to leave.
I did a really bad job, and there are kind of open rebellions, and it was all going wrong. And there came a point where they were like, okay, we're sick of everything. This is the end. And I thought, oh, so you're all leaving then? And then they exiled me, the player. And I was like, what the fuck? It's just, I hadn't even crossed my mind they could exile me from that city that I was running. And there's a little sequence where you're a tiny little person just like on the edge of the city, just walking away into the wilderness. I'm like, how has this happened? I'm the player. It's not supposed to happen to me. Anyway, it's quite good.
Yeah, so it's a city management survival game, set in kind of Victorian Ice Age kind of setting. It does get kind of explained why that happened deeper in the campaign. Yeah. But yeah, like, I really like it as well. Chris approved. Multiple Chris's like this game.
Yeah.
The reason I really like it is it's not a sandbox city building game. It is not City Skylines or SimCity even that has a lot of the same systems. It's it's got 3 campaigns, but like one main one. It's a challenge. Like it's a single player thing that you attempt to complete that has a finite length of about 10, 12 hours and ends. And that, it feels very different to like what these games are often trying to be, which is these sort of like indefinite toolbox kind of experiences, which is good. I mean, those games are good. This feels a lot more to me like a board game. Let's keep going back to that world, but it has that kind of like pandemic kind of thing where you're trying to solve a crisis and the game is just about trying to solve that crisis as best as you can and as efficiently as you can. And you can succeed better or worse and be forced into harder or tougher decisions about how you survive. But it's like, and then once you've done that experience, to be honest, I don't know if I'll replay it. But I'm actually okay with that because like, realistically, I probably would play a given city builder for like 10, 15, 20 hours, then feel like I'd seen everything and then not touch it for ages. So a game that manages to have like an experience with an arc and kind of atmospheric moments and planned sort of designed challenges in the same amount of time that I'd probably be playing one of these games, I'm actually really down for. Like actually for me, it feels like kind of an underexplored way of structuring one of these games where it's like, it has an end. Like, the goal is not to just keep building a city until it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The goal is simply to like get as many people as you can through a really shit situation. And that's really interesting. And that I think is backed up mechanically by the fact that there really isn't a single best way of approaching it. Like there are lots of ways to succeed. How far have you got? How deep are you in?
So I failed pretty hard over the course of about 3 hours, and then I started again immediately, which, you know, tells you about this game really, is that, there's something very, I fucking love the way it looks and it kind of feels like, it's the atmosphere and the kind of what they've done. You're kind of in this sunken cylindrical, it's quite a very abnormal kind of formation in this ice, and you've installed your just an enormous kind of generator, which is like this tower in the middle, which is this burning, relentlessly burning, smouldering kind of chimney that just powers, gives you this radius of heat, and everyone's allowed to kind of subsist in that warmth, and it gives you this real sense of just being, building this smoky, smouldering shanty town that just grows out in concentric circles from it. And the process of actually building that city is really satisfying and really nice, even though ostensibly the atmosphere is like super grim and bad things are happening. I love what it does with the tech tree, because the tech tree is kind of how it tells the story of your society. And the tech tree is more about, it's not the tech tree, but the laws.
The policy tree and the tech tree, I guess.
So the law system is kind of where your moral dilemmas come in. And it's like, it's stuff like, do you put children to work or give them a place to stay and not work and, be safe? And you get these morale boosts and, output boosts for various things. And you're always juggling the two main kind of, driving forces in your society, which are, there's a negative one, discontent
and hope.
And these things are kind of going up and down against one another and competing. And you fail if hope kind of tanks out, and, you're challenged with, hopeless situations. You have to kind of try your best to, I don't want to kind of spoil what you can do in the game, because it's kind of an interesting part of how it develops. But a lot of the laws and policies that you can enforce, can seem like authoritarian or tough or brutal, but you're kind of responding to this brutal situation in turn. You're kind of asking yourselves these questions about what's the right thing to do, really, ultimately morally right thing to do about this situation. And it gives you a very kind of, even though it's mournful and bleak, it's very kind of calm and strangely relaxing, I found. You're in this kind of pocket universe where you're trying to get people through this terrible time. And, it's odd, because when you're playing a city builder, I've never really registered this before, but you're really stewing in that atmosphere, because there's nothing to break the pacing or there's nothing to break the format. You're just in this fixed perspective all the time, and you're just surrounded by the sights and sounds of the city going up and down. And I think I've never noticed it, because most city building games use this completely passively. All the music and all the kind of art is designed to basically pacify you and be completely, seamless, and stuff like SimCity is supposed to delight and be enjoyable and just generally a nice place to hang out, which is why I think we've talked about on the podcast previously about, city building games don't really simulate slums or, really negative social things, because you'd have to stew there and you'd have to look at it all the time and feel bad about it. And Frostpunk is a game that actually challenges that and says, it looks like a terrible place to live, and you're going to have to sit here and watch it happen and try and help people. And this is a really interesting psychological position to be in.
It is, and it's interesting how it achieves that, I think, because it's about a disaster scenario, a crisis, where like a lot of real social structures have collapsed before the game even begins. There is no money. There are only two types of people, workers and slightly more skilled workers called engineers. And there is no difference between them except where they can work and how many of each you typically have. But there's not a huge value difference between them, and they don't, at least as far as the simulation goes, represent like different social groups. So the situation is so dire that like there is no like rich and poor. There's no poverty really. People suffer, but they tend to suffer equally. So it depicts kind of like suffering, but it doesn't depict like needless inequity, if that makes sense. Like, you're not like, I've made an amazing banking sector in my city and now this whole area has gone to shit, or like, something, or something more challenging than that. Like, it's, like, it has very few, if any, kind of real social issues represented in it, or even like contemporary Victorian social issues represented in it at all. Because the idea is the world's gone to shit to an extent that we just have to survive, and it's very cold. So there are like moments of like, how do you handle certain things? Like, how do you handle, someone stealing food rations or something like that, or trying to save themselves more? You know, you have interesting decisions to make about that, but it feels like even though it does get much closer to like human interest than these games do, it still does so from a somewhat position of abstraction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly not saying anything about like modern society. Like the Sims game that does, you know, city sim games are always very political, particularly in their assumptions about tax and spend and things like that. They always come from a very similar position. And so it's very funny to play these games. I mean, I imagine someone in Sweden playing, city skylines and looking at the tax rates and being like, holy shit, that's low. The idea that you'd lower those tax rates would seem insane to someone in Sweden. And someone in America would have a completely different take on that. It's just these games are actually really political in interesting ways. And Frostpunk definitely dodges that with the post-apocalypse scenario. It doesn't have to deal with any of that really. You're not taxing people. It's just labor. Everyone is just labor.
It has some interesting, it does have some things to say. Like it's by This War of Mine developers. Like it's obvious that this is their next game. Like it's obvious that this is what its purpose is to make you consider how much you're willing to compromise to survive.
Yeah.
In fact, like I won't spoil anything, but I feel like that's something that doesn't quite stick because, I managed to finish it with a society that I was pretty proud of. Like obviously compromises get made. Like, I did invent moonshine because it made people happy. But like there are sort of like totalitarian nuclear options you can go to particularly deep. And one thing I really like about it is the situation gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And even though you'll be in a much better, more productive, more successful city 12 hours in than you are when you start, it actually achieves the thing that maybe other games like this, back to Battletech, etc., don't achieve, which is like at the very end it's like, okay, now solve this, and it's like, I can't do that sounds impossible. And then pulling it off feels great because it's like it escalates the stakes so much that it goes beyond simply like, and now a harder version of what you've already been doing. It's like, and now we're just going to fuck you over completely, like deal with this. And actually you kind of want that because that's the promise of the game. And coming out the other side of that, and so it dangles these sort of like policy, moral disaster, nuclear options over your head. And I managed to beat it without doing any of them, which I was really pleased with. I was like, and I was kind of ready for like my medal. Like, where's my medal for like, and I realized like, and it does a thing when it, and again, this isn't a spoiler, but it recaps some of the decisions you made and said like, we became this kind of society, but it leans really hard into whatever negative things you did.
Right.
So mine was quite short because it was like,
So like, moonshine's pretty good. No problems with
exactly.
That.
Like we had legalized dueling. And like, because I feel like the message is that survival situations force people into these really uncomfortable positions of compromise. But actually it's still really satisfying to try and figure out, trying to find a solution that doesn't involve compromising, but knowing that you always have that ability to like press the button marked this form of totalitarianism. It's not a spoiler to say that you make a really crucial choice about whether or not you're going to make a more rational or more faith-based society.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
And I went with faith because I thought, and I do think this, that like in that scenario, like a kind of hope-based religious way of living is actually a very desirable thing socially and personally. Yeah. And actually created this really, you talk about moments of it that are genuinely calming. You do get the option to like create a faith-based police and whip people. That's a way of maintaining order. But you can also just like maintain regular like, midnight processionals out in the cold to help people kind of like have a relationship with the cold other than it's bad and it's coming to get us, or like candlelight vigils and prayer sessions and things. And it's generally quite nice. Like you build all these churches and things and the bells start to toll and it's like, it feels like you've built something like a little bit more like more human, has some culture to it, out of this kind of big piece of industrial machinery that you're trying to operate.
It's interesting because I picked the other one and, it's interesting how it frames it. So, this is actually not too far into the game, so I don't feel too bad about spoiling. This is a decision you make. But, you build basically guard towers near your housing. And, the way it's framed is like, it's initially framed as a really positive thing. Like people feel safer because they feel like there's some sort of law, and the people who are guarding them are people who are part of their small community who they know. So they actually know the guards, and they're actually supposed, it's painted as being a good thing. And you get these little story bits where it's like, a kid was lost in the cold and one of the guards found them and brought them back to their family, because everyone knows each other here. But holy shit, you can see the hooks in there for like where this is going to go further down the line if I go down this track and keep on pushing as soon as that sort of falls apart. And it feels like the game is interested in these themes of, what happens when those things start to, slide off into their respective.
And sometimes that's just like from mechanical need, and sometimes from civilians saying like, someone stole my bread. When are you going to create the faith police?
I'll do that right away, sir. Have some moonshine.
I did make myself a little tiny pope.
Okay.
Little pope.
It's a little accidental pope.
It gave me the ability to go, don't worry about it, every 2 days. And that was extremely important in the late game.
Is this the anti-pope and the anti-pasto sense?
Yeah.
The small pope before the larger pope.
It's explicitly not Christianity, but it's very much a lot like Christianity.
Yeah.
And you can become something like the kind of the head of the church, basically. It's more like maybe like an archbishop or something, but like, rather than just their captain, you are like, the kind of a religious figure, and you gain an ability called like the captain's words, which is you just reassure everything that everyone's been okay. And it creates this huge, it basically just tanks your discontent every couple of days, which is really, really good. Useful. But it felt quite benign to me, because it's like of all of the kind of abuse, it's not really an abuse of power, because it's basically just like, I say, no pun intended, like chill out every 2 days. And everyone's like, oh, okay. And that was really helpful. Like, no, yes, maybe a tremendous abuse of power and, putting myself on a pedestal where I can tell people how to feel about things. But it's very cold. Don't underestimate how cold it is.
The game kind of expands by, you can send scouting parties out to like nodes around your initial base. So as far as I've played, you've got the one base, and it's a big area, but it's limited, and that's kind of an interesting thing to contend with later, I imagine. But you can form scouting parties and send them off to find kind of remains of other, other expeditions that have met various fates and stuff, and you retrieve resources from those and people and that kind of thing. And that's a really nice progression mechanic for this sort of game. It's a really good way of letting you kind of stretch beyond your city without having to build multiple cities, which is the classic thing with a SimCity type game.
Yeah. You're doing the ability to have outpost states from, but they're not cities. They're like, you can get like a coal mine and they'll send you a certain amount of coal every day, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's travel time to consider. It's interesting. Like it has a very, strict relationship with time. Like the campaign takes 45 days. That's it.
Right.
That's the entire, it will end after that point. If it doesn't end before that, because everything goes terribly. And, that means, for example, like no children will be born. Like, while, new citizens come from survivors that your scouts find out in the wilderness, if you want them. And that allows it to do lots of really interesting things. Like, it is very happy to like play a form of like refugee chicken with you, where it's like, how will, it'll give you the option to be like, there's loads, people have heard you're being successful. Refugees are coming, people are seeking shelter. But some of them are sick and some of them are kids. And if you haven't passed a child labor law because you're not a dick, like, then, kids are a liability, potentially.
Yeah.
Do you just take the working adults? Like, can you stomach that? Do you take the entire first wave, but then the second time they come around, you realize you can't build houses anymore and then you're in trouble? Like, putting you in that uncomfortable position, I think is one of its best strengths, where it's like, you really want to reach for the easy button the second time around, but you've like told yourself like, no, I'm going to take in everybody. I'm going to do this right. And then it's so much harder to do it. Like it's almost like a self-set difficulty level called trying to do the right thing. It's very cool. And it's worth reiterating how good it looks. Like I was going to say, I think a final thing on that was like, the 2D art is really, really nice, really evocative.
Yeah.
Like it uses like just a lot of gaunt people. A lot of very cold people.
Sad, cold people.
The game itself is 3D, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it looks fucking beautiful. Like, it's even got just, like giant machines in it and stuff that just,
very Dishonored-y, giant,
very Antonov style,
walkie robots,
amazing looking robots, beautifully animated as well. It's as a aesthetic achievement is amazing, really beautiful.
It is. I'm not normally a huge fan of steampunk, except outside the context of like Dishonored, where I would say that it's a very light influence. It's really not the point. And this I think is successful. Like to the extent that Frostpunk is supposed to be because it's a steampunk thing, and the steam has frozen. I think it's very successful. Like it gets what's appealing about that, like the kind of the sort of tightly packed winding streets. It has some really lovely little art touches, like when later on when you're building houses, if you build them next to each other, they kind of naturally terrace up with these kinds of little sort of walkways and sort of gantries and things, and you can zoom in and feel like you're, looking at like, I don't know, the city from Thief or something. Even though you're building in like these concentric rings that are quite artificial feeling, it really, like, I felt like the place really held together as a place.
Yeah,
like
totally.
that I'd made. It was like really.
I love being able to pick the giant chimney in the middle and overcharge it as well. Shit was getting especially cold.
Yeah.
It makes this kind of horn noise. It's going whoo.
Everyone gets happier as well.
Yeah. And everyone goes, woo! for 24 hours and then back to the sadness, back to the moonshine.
Here's a pro tip. If you ever do because this caught me out and it almost fucked me over and it's really annoying and it's probably not how the game should work. If you are doing sometimes citizens will say, my house is cold or my workplace is cold, and you can say, I will ignore that. Or you can say, I will try and heat some of them. Or you can say, I'll try and heat all of them. And you can basically say that for a certain amount of time, you will heat half the houses or something like that. And if you can do that, you get a big bonus to hope. But here's the thing. I tried to do a thing where I overcharged the generator while I researched actual heat upgrades.
Yeah.
So that I could then switch them on and then unovercharge the generator before it exploded, basically. However, doing so technically causes the heat to drop. So imagine you have your threshold of required heat and you exceed that using the overcharge, then you massively exceed it using the upgrades, and then you drop the overcharge out and you're still above the threshold, but technically the heat dropped.
Yeah.
That qualifies as failing the promise,
right.
which is really annoying because people are like, but I was slightly warmer than this a minute ago. I hate this. And then discontent goes up, even though you solved the problem they originally had. Like
That's like a scripting thing. It's like,
yeah, it's those moments where like, if this was a tabletop game, this is the thing where you're all sat around the table playing Pandemic or whatever.
Yeah.
And you go, it shouldn't work like that. Like, this is fine.
Have a house rule.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like, that's a moment where you miss a human GM kind of managing it. But that's not universally true.
Yeah.
how did you find getting into it? Because I found that initially, also like Battletech, it doesn't tell you a lot.
Yeah, for example, it took me so long to figure out how to build fucking roads.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, it's a tiny little, like, you've got building screens and stuff, and it's a tiny little icon at the bottom of the small kind of bar across the bottom of the screen, and you got to find that, and that took a while. And stuff like figuring out how to assign workers to things, which is the first thing you have to do. And you just, when you figure out you have to click on the resources and then assign workers, and then you see them tunneling like roads out to them, and it's a really cool animation, but I'm like, is this the right thing to do? Should I be building stuff now? Like,
yeah.
And it feels like it should give you a few more pointers. Initially, you want to be researching a lot of resource buildings, but it gives you quite a lot of choice in the initial research track across like 4 different places. I think you could probably fuck yourself quite badly if you don't unlock buildings that are going to get you lots of coal, for example, because you're always going to need coal. And you can need that.
There's also like, because the campaign is set in like a single location, all of the resources you will ever have from local sources are all there, and they go up in tiers of complexity in terms of how you get them out and things like that. But all the hooks are there for later on. So, no, I was about to say later on when you really need wood and you've chopped down every tree in there, you can build like massive drills that drill into the ice wall itself to find frozen forests, which is a cool idea. But those hooks are there from the beginning of the game. So when it initially says like, shit, we've got no wood, everyone's going to die, you don't know to click on the debris field that your workers can go and just pick up from broken crates and stuff.
Yeah.
You look at the frozen forest or the cliff wall where that icon is, and you don't really know which is the one you're supposed to do now. And it becomes clear, but it does feel a little bit inelegant.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely, I think a lot of the reason I had to restart was because I'd also built my city really inefficiently, not knowing what upgrades I'd get in the future in terms of how stuff was going to be heated, like the smaller heaters you can get and how they work and stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely a game that I felt like I mean, I guess you didn't have to restart it because you sort of got through it, but I think a lot of people might run into that problem where they slightly screw themselves. Maybe it's thematic, maybe that's part of.
I think so. I think I got a little bit lucky on certain decisions, and like, but also kind of like I had a sense of what I was in for. So I was like, I think this is going to be important, and then just kind of got lucky / vindicated in the fact that like the right things turned out to be worth prioritizing.
Yeah,
that made sense.
Chris, didn't you have a protester with an unusual...
I went to, yeah. his name is Andrew Baring. It almost looked like Andrew Boring, but it was like my first protester, and I brought up, and I only had like 80 people, and I brought up the list of like what everyone's doing. And this one guy is protesting, and I clicked on him, and it was activity, protesting, biggest complaint, everything's fine. Like,
and I'm not okay with that.
Like,
I was saying it would be great if that was his picket sign. Like,
Yeah.
everything is fine. Everything is fine.
And that man would go on to invent Twitter. Yeah.
Should we do questions?
Yes, we should.
Yeah, let's do it.
First up, Adam writes, Dear Crocus and Cyclamen, I'm currently getting them spring feelings from playing Animal Crossing on my 3DS, and I wondered, what are some of your favourite life simulator games on the PC? Only good one I've played in the last few years was Stardew Valley, and I'm starving for more. Warm regards, Adam.
The original Populous, a game in which you could lower the tier of a terrain tile underneath a citizen as they were on it. Terrifying them, I presume. It was just like a pixel going down, but it was, I like.
You just like to drop little people.
Yeah, just drop them down, you know. They don't know what's happening, but it's great.
So
That's life.
This is an interesting hair to split. Is a life simulator like Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing where it's like your life? Or is a life simulator like SimCity where it's lives?
I think they've got to be separate lives from you as the player. I think as the player, I always like, oh no, but that's not what Stardew Valley's like, is it?
No, Stardew Valley is like my new farm.
Yeah, because I was going out for the Populous angle of being like, you're controlling the circumstances.
It's strange that sort of the life simulator seems to so often involve farming. Like,
Yeah.
it's also Animal Crossing and...
It might be because almost all service-related jobs are profoundly unsatisfactory.
Oh, hey, what about, I haven't played it yet, but Jason Rohrer's new game, 1 Hour, 1 Life. It's very much a life simulator, and his main concept is like, when you launch a game, you join the server, and you are spawned as the baby of an existing character. And you can't do anything. You're a helpless baby. That person has to support you to adulthood, which only takes like 20 minutes or something, or less. But it sounds like it's a fucking nightmare because players are jerks.
Yeah.
Like even when it's their own child, they're not that willing to help that person to adulthood. But the idea is like, it's all like caveman stuff at the moment. But as players get together and craft more shit and advance the technology, he's going to be making assets and adding them to the game to represent the new technology levels they reach. So it's crazy ambitious, but yeah, definitely a life simulator.
You know, I have a soft spot for The Sims and always will.
Yeah, it's
and
great.
like
Great games.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I sporadically return to The Sims 4 as just a way to pass like an afternoon every now and then. It's a management game. It's just about time management and people catching fire and kissing. Like that's what it is. And that's good.
It's a good thing.
I like that.
That's a good
yeah.
thing.
And it's not about farming, which makes it the rare example.
Better.
Yeah. A job is just something you either sit down at a computer and do as a bar decreases and then you come away with that with money.
That's quite realistic.
Very realistic. Or you just go away. You go to work like your parents used to go for work. You just vanish. And then when you return to your own house, because you sort of play the house, I think, in The Sims. That's the secret of The Sims, is you are the house.
But the house directs people's destinies, like a haunted house.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Too much control.
This is random, but I just remembered recently that The Sims was apparently Will Wright had the idea for it when his house was destroyed in a forest fire in California. Him and his family were fine. They all got out in plenty of time, but they just lost their entire house and all their possessions. And as he was rebuilding, he was thinking about like how you fit all these things in a house. And he was really interested in the idea of just building his house and, you know, slotting things together, and thought it would make a good game.
Well, it paid off.
Yeah, to say the least.
The ultimate life sim is Spore. Because you make a blob and you give it 5 limbs and say, fucking figure it out. And watch it grow into a beautiful 5-legged bird,
dick.
Perhaps. or dick. I'll try to make a race of sentient guitars in Spore. Terrible mistake.
How's that going to end up looking, Tom?
So it ended up looking, the strings of the guitars were spikes.
Right.
But the head was the neck of the guitar, and they would frequently bend over and impale their own heads on the spikes that were actually their own. It was not a good evolution, Chris.
I remember.
Very bad evolution.
I ran the PC Gamer Sporecast, which was a curation of cool Spore creatures. And so I would regularly browse as part of my job, the most popular new creations for Spore and add them to this list. And it was full of just incredible stuff. People made absolutely amazing things. And I played the game with that, reviewed it with those creatures in my world. And so it'd just be like a village full of grandpas in wheelchairs were being attacked by a giant chair, like a huge chair, where like it's
Where's
stomping.
Your God now?
It's stomping on the wheelchair guys are trying to throw spears at it, and it's stomping on them. And it's got this like beautiful ornate feather inlaid in the back of the chair as it stomps on their houses. And then I run away from that, and I run into like a small cluster of moving sniper rifles where their like tripod mount is their front legs and they drag themselves along like that. Like, this is incredible.
Just as God intended.
Not really a life sim in the kind of like live your own life, but like it could be if you owned a farm sense, so much as like live your own life as if you had ready access to a lot of acid. Next up is Steb, who writes, "Hi. In episode 234, Chris talked about the realization of playing a game wrong, with all walls must fall. This made me think of an experience I'd had the day before when playing Train Valley. This game could be described concisely as Mini Metro meets Transport Tycoon. The player must build tracks between stations and control the switch points to guide each train to its destination. I only realized after halfway through the second world that you can make trains stop and wait by clicking on them. I've been playing a fast-paced game of timing and planning, where due to my slight misjudgment of a train, acceleration and speed, I often ended up diverting trains at the last minute by building new track on the fly, Wallace and Gromit style, to avoid crashes. The ability to stop and start trains made precise timing redundant, and it became a game of careful network planning and packing the tracks to capacity for maximum efficiency. My question then is, can you think of any moments where missing a mechanic has completely changed the nature of a game for you? Steb." So I can't, but this did make me think. It's a good story for one thing, but also, the game he was accidentally playing sounds more fun than the game subsequently discovered. And I sort of feel like that's one of those instances where like you're kind of allowed to forget you learned that and keep trying to do the Wallace and Gromit laying the track in front of the train game. Maybe.
Yeah, I frequently play games wrong, but I do it knowingly. Like, I see what they're asking me to do, and I decide, no, it would be better a game if you had to do this. And actually, I do this with Far Cry 4 and 5, where I have my own idea of how alarms should work in that game, and they don't work that way. I think I used to believe I think it actually does answer the question, because I think I did believe they worked that way at first, and then after I discovered they didn't, I carried on playing that way. And it's with an alarm. At an outpost in Far Cry, there's several alarms, and if the enemies like see you, they'll go and set off an alarm. And you can shoot the alarms, and that breaks them. Or you can go all the way up to the alarm and then do a really long sort of hacking animation that eventually disables it. And that does the exact same thing. There's no reason not to just shoot it. If you have a silenced weapon, you might as well just shoot it. Like a bow. People, like, even if they're close enough to hear the noise, they just kind of look at it and think, oh, that's weird. Like, there's no reason not to just shoot it. And that makes no sense. And it's a fun challenge to see how can I get close enough to an alarm to disable it manually. So the rule I play with is if you can do that, if you get close enough to disable it manually, all alarms are disabled. You just pretend you've solved the alarm problem. They're all off. If you shoot them from a distance, then the other one is not disabled. You've got to manually shoot all of them. And that's an interesting challenge also, before anyone wants to trigger them. And then the other rule I make up, which is not true at all, but I thought it was for a long time, is that if they find a body, they should try and sound the alarm. They don't. They can find as many bodies as you like. They'll be alarmed, but they don't actually set off an alarm. They're just like, oh, this is weird. People are dying.
Don't want to make a fuss.
Like, they have to see you specifically before they set off an alarm. And so I play as if no one can find a body until all alarms are disabled.
Right.
And all alarms are disabled in my head if I've used one of them up close or if I've shot them all. And neither of those things are true. But it's a much more fun stealth game if you do it that way.
I think arbitrary restrictions, kind of accidental or otherwise, can result in great things in games, especially games that are sandbox enough to kind of deal with that. I remember once, Supreme Commander 2, I decided that I would try and destroy the enemy using only engineers, which build buildings. They just do basic buildings unit, and you can give them a gun, just a shitty gun. Like, there's an upgrade in the upgrade track that lets you give them a gun. You can also give them jetpacks. Just a thought.
Is this Cybran?
No, this was, I don't think it was Cybran actually. I can't remember which one it was. It was one of the basic. Oh no, the Cybrans are the red ones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it was actually.
I seem to remember they're the ones who...
So the thing is that they're the cheapest thing to build, and if you've got like a factory, the great thing you do in Supreme Commander is that you build energy production facilities around your factories, and they make them more productive. The energy goes directly into the building, and they produce things faster. And if you've got just a basic supply of ore, you can just produce hundreds of engineers, and then you can make the engineers build more factories that build engineers, and then so on until you've maxed out your unicap with engineers, and then you research the upgrade that gives them all a laser and all a jetpack, and then you box select and right click on the enemy, and fucking hell, it's the most amazing sight you've ever seen. These tiny little balls, just little innocent ball robot creatures, but hundreds of them flying through the air in a kind of beautiful cascade, and then they land, and then the lasers begin, and then it's just a spreading virus of like Borg-like destruction as they just unfold and start delivering the lasers at buildings. And they patched it. They patched it because I wrote an article for PC Gamer about it, and it didn't work for long after that. But fuck, it was good. I love games where you can just go single-mindedly down one track and kind of break it. I've always loved games that let you do that.
I also did that with Supreme Commander 2. There was also Cybran. They had the cheapest experimental unit, which is, I think, I want to call it the Megalith. I might be wrong.
One of the smallest
spider thing, yeah. It was like the small spider bot, much less spectacular than Supreme Commander 1 spider bot, which is a huge thing, but also
that's the Monkey Lord.
Yeah. And Subcon 2 had these much smaller ones, quite quick to build one, and they're incredible at ground attacks, but they have no anti-air, and they're not that tough. But then there's another unit called an Adapter, which provides a shield and is anti-air, if you upgrade it the right way. And so you can just churn out thousands of them and a bunch of these Spiderbot type things. And those two together, they protect against every single thing they can possibly do to you, and that just wins.
The Cybrans are the best. They're just the best faction in anything.
Subcom 1, they had walking boats.
Yeah, that's what I was
can't really argue with that.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my plans in Subcon 1. It's like, what if I just build everything that's a boat? And then there's like quite a small puddle in the middle of it was a poor early game. It was because they could only do the puddle, and they've got really long range artillery.
I built a great naval factory for this tiny puddle.
And then they're just like, the puddle is just completely full of boats. There's no space for more boats. And then you research the legs upgrade, and suddenly they all just kind of like walk out, and it's horrendous. It's really terrifying.
I love Supreme Commander does a great line in radiuses, radii. And, for like, there's intel range, there's, like, true sensor range where you can sense even stealth units. And then there's like, anti-air range. Then there's land range. Maybe there's like an artillery weapon, and that's one range. And then there's direct fire, and that's a different range. And then there's torpedo range. And I think boats are the only thing that have all of those things. Like, and so you select a boat, and it just has like 17 like rings around it. And you don't know what they all mean right away, but you just get the sense that this thing does everything. So.
Best game.
I think in terms of self-set rules, it's one of the reasons I love Jedi Academy. Like, I played through that game so many times, but I always do it with like a rule for this playthrough, which is like, I'm going to be like a good Jedi student and only ever use the lightsaber and force powers for everything. Like, you're not allowed to use a gun or a grenade or anything like that. And then trying to do the like slightly weird, like, I secretly don't believe I have force powers playthrough, which makes no context in the sense of the story. You do have to do Jedi training, but there is the kind of like, well, that was weird. Anyway, back to guns kind of version, which is also really cool.
I used to think in Jedi Knight that was just a pure like, I don't know, sort of style thing, but I would, there was a button I don't think it ever really needed, but when you had a lightsaber out, you could turn it off. Kept it in your hand.
You can do it in Academy as well. You just press the number key for the thing again. And I would keep my lightsaber off until I really needed it. Yeah.
Only when I was actually going to attack would I turn my lightsaber on.
The reason that option is there is that it's mandatory. Like, you have to switch it off. You can't just run around with it like it's a sword in a RPG. Like,
that moment where you come across an enemy and they've got a lightsaber, and it's, that red lightsaber, and you just draw it standing still. Yeah. That's good. It's good. That face-off moment is so good.
It's good. It's one of the reasons that like was slightly ruined in KOTOR, where like everyone jumped into battle with like a huge leaping attack, and then would light their lightsabers in the air, which is like, no, let me stop for a moment, light it. Everyone will appreciate that, and then we go.
Yeah,
that's Star Wars. That's how it works.
Yeah, totally.
All the better if it's raining.
Indeed. Yeah. The next question comes from James, it's a mixture of question and also genuine expertise on a subject, which is always welcome, genuinely. James writes, hello, terms and conditions. After your Steam Spy chat last week, he means 2 weeks ago, because this is pre-resed, I felt compelled to write in. I'm currently working at a small tech company to implement what is now known as the dreaded GDPR, all new privacy regulation coming into force across all of the EU and our little island in May. The laws basically are quite open to interpretation, but place a whole lot more power in the individual to stop companies using data that can personally identify them, particularly sharing it with other organizations without consent. This data includes profiles, adverts, mailing lists, IP addresses, etc., etc. Not only that, the law applies to companies that hold data on EU citizens, so international companies must also comply or potentially face hefty fines. The Steam conversation stirred me to wonder how this is going to affect the games industry. It seems Steam and Facebook are just getting their controversy out of the way early. The privacy bus is tooting its horn. Anyway, better make this a question. If you could write a piece of legislation that everyone will hate, but ultimately help the games industry do good, what would it be? Laters, James, and now we get to wade into the territory called Make Up a Law.
Yeah.
At 10:20 on a Wednesday night after a couple of glasses of rum.
None of us have law degrees, or any expertise with law at all. But, I would love it if for every hour of game, 99% of it must be interactive in some way. Like that's the law. No fucking 20-minute cutscenes. No 1-minute cutscenes. That's too much.
Or, like, if the cutscene's skippable, then technically that is interactive, right? So that's fine.
That's fine. Completely allowed. But yeah, anything that, more than 1 minute and 60, that's the crushing fines.
What if cutscenes still exist, but you can press a button at any time to make a random character in the scene go, woo!
That will get around the regulation. It's not the spirit of the law.
That's how, Ubisoft will get around this in Far Cry. It's like, we still want this cutscene. Vass is still going to talk to your face for 7 minutes, but you can make him say, woo!
What the definition of madness
It's doing the same woo! Again and again, woo!
But I guess it's a random character in the scene, so the wolf in a cage over there might go, woo!
Yeah, that's the idea,
random
right?
moment.
That makes sense for a wolf. That's narratively consistent.
That is narrative, but nonetheless interactive. So the law, it's legal. It's legal. That's the main thing.
It's like you control a mosquito during this scene. It can fly around freely, land on anybody. The mosquito can say woo too, yeah, sure. I was thinking
why that was the interaction I thought it would be. It could literally be anything, but for the reason I want it to be that.
But it's the power of its interaction is perhaps limited in the narrative. Like, maybe you bite Vass and eventually gets malaria, but not for a long time.
Well, how about you press a button in any game cutscene and Vass from Far Cry 3 shows up and delivers that monologue?
Regardless of game and company.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, gone home.
But you could just wander off. That'd be the best speech ever. You could just wander the fuck away from him as he's saying it.
Yeah.
I love games that let you do that as well. But, you're in a cage when Vass does that to you.
Yeah, that's actually, it really builds me, particularly in Far Cry 5. Like, it goes to such lengths to try and shove your face in the villains, or shove the villain's face into yours. And,
kiss! It bellows.
Basically,
kiss.
yeah. It's like, narratively connect. It does that so much and I'm just so tired of it now. Like, I think I don't remember, I didn't like the plot of Far Cry 3, but Vass was really well acted and it was like one of the first great bits of digital acting. And I think I maybe papered over a bit, like I don't know, that trick was relatively new at that point, and shoving a face in it. To some extent, I was just kind of like, wow, look at that face, that really works. Like, I'm seeing all his expressions.
It really looks like an actor. Thing right at me.
When I see the guy who plays Vass in TV shows, I'm like, oh, it's Vass. It's just 100% recognize all his mannerisms and all that stuff. But the more they do it, the more you're just like, oh god, like, yeah, okay, you want to show me your facial acting. It's not even good in Far Cry 5. I don't think it's as good as it was in Far Cry 3. It's just like people just looking boring and saying incredibly tedious dialogue to you. And some of those cutscenes you can't skip because it's in-engine enough that they probably don't know how to advance you forwards a certain amount. But yeah, I agree that should be illegal.
No joke code. No joke code.
Right, if you can't skip me forward, you can't do the cutscene.
Word.
I wonder if there's a case for tightening advertising standards against what can be implied to be a game, because they obviously exist. But talking of technically this is in engine, technically this is an engine is literally what's printed at the bottom of a lot of like
Right.
pre-movie kind of hype rolls for games and things. Total nonsense.
But even, you know, in less clear language than that, it's often, it's in-engine footage is the current one.
Yeah.
But it used to be like alpha footage. Sometimes it'd be like, you know, another made up word footage or, you know, concept footage. Like there's been loads over the years that have used to kind of try and get away from it.
Show the actual game would be, with the UI, would be like, that'd be the law I'd pass.
Yeah.
Like,
I think actually, if I remember right, the regulations on Steam screenshots, at least, I don't know about, probably not trailers, but for the screenshots, they're very clear now that it has to be in-game and the UI has to be there if there is a UI and that kind of thing.
I suppose the argument is that you're selling the sort of mind's eye sense of what the game is like. But actually, if that doesn't come across from how the game actually plays, then that's not what the mind's eye sense of what the game is.
No.
Not really.
But the experience of the game isn't the mind's eye experience of imagining what the game is. The experience of the game is playing it with the UI and everything that, you know, the actual game.
Oh yeah, I guess actually my law, and this is a total dickhead law, but since that's the question, is I would say all trailers have to be purely in-game footage. Like, I mean, basically your point, but like, you can't even do like a fun live action thing where it's really obvious it's not the game and you're not even pretending it's the game. Fuck you, show me the fucking game.
There have been some good ones though. There have been some very good ones.
Don't care.
And like, I think people watching like really high level CG footage know that's what it is. I mean, the greatest gap in modern games, I think, is probably Star Wars: The Old Republic, between the two things. So, Star Wars: The Old Republic, when they did kick off their latest kind of arc of storyline, had a fucking amazing Star Wars short. They made a really good 5-minute Star Wars short about, you know, a pair of brothers who were raised in different ways, and there's an amazing lightsaber fight in the middle of it. And I'm glad that exists as a thing. And I know that the game doesn't look like that at all. And anyone investigating that game, to even just the merest Google, will realise the game doesn't look like that, and it is actually a big old MMO, and there's going to be a lot of kind of baggage around it. But I think I quite like that exists.
Maybe actually, maybe I can revise my law, because you're just reminding me that, like, one of my favourite trailers of all time is the Warcraft 3 cinematic one that was just like an orc and a human fighting, and it was like the most spectacular combat scene I'd ever seen in anything. I think my law would be, on your Steam page, you must have one trailer that is purely gameplay footage, and it must be the first one. Like, so when I go to your Steam page, I guess it's like more of a Steam guideline than a law that you can be arrested for. But yeah, I just want to click on the Steam page and I just want to, it's so common for me to go there and the fucking trailer is just like a bunch of cinematics and teasers and slogans. And it's not even like, you know, maybe that's the best thing for your company, but I, as a player, want you to do this for me. It would be better for you if you did this. If you just show me the fucking game. I'm not going to buy the game off a bunch of slogans and cinematics. That's never going to happen.
Bonus law, also regarding trailers. Instead of the trailer starting at 1/3 mark, the trailer has to start at the start. It's simple. But, you know, the trailer's got to start. You can't be showing like a word flashing up or a logo.
Oh, so you mean like
up,
it has to get going right from the start?
Yeah. So you can't be like, once upon a time, in a world populated by walking sniper rifles. It's got to actually, you know, show the sniper rifles immediately, get you in there straight away.
Surely that, to some extent, is just taking away people's ability to set things up or like prime the audience to receive something exciting.
Just punch them in the face with it. Just go.
There's some kind of, I can't remember what it is, but there's some kind of, a law of YouTube that you can always skip at least the first 15% of any given video.
Yeah.
Like if it's 50 minutes long, you can skip the first 10 minutes at least. And I found that to be broadly true.
Maybe that shouldn't be a law. It should be like a functionality that's built into services where you could just activate that as like a checkbox. Just skip the first 15% of this. Cause
particularly
skip to first Zimmer Womp.
Exactly.
It should look at the behavior of people who do skip through the video and see where they stop. Like if they keep skipping and skipping, and then they get to the like 3 minutes in and they're like, oh, I'm going to watch from here, then it should know that and then just start.
This applies to
more big data.
Yes, more algorithms.
This applies to dev talking heads videos where they've only got 30 seconds of footage to show you. But if they have people talking about it in between, then they can stretch it out to 4 minutes.
Yeah.
But if algorithms, the magical algorithms I don't understand, they see where viewers sit down and watch for a prolonged amount of time and just give you that as a mashup, probably going to show you the bits of game. Sweet bits of game.
Little indicator that says you've seen all of the actual game footage in this behind the scenes vid doc.
Go and live.
Yeah. You can stop now.
Yeah.
The rest will just be game developers saying how excited they are about something they can't talk about. I don't know if we answered the question.
That's the law.
But when have we ever? Next comes from Henry, who writes, "Dear Crates and Crow puns, I love Typing of the Dead, which turns a boring typing exercise into an action-filled and hilarious shooter. What other mundane PC-related tasks can be turned into gameplay mechanics? Plugging in USB devices for reloading a gun? Deleting files for restoring health? Ideas? Keep podding the cast." Henry from Germany. Incidentally, I love the idea of the gun, the reload animation, where you go to reload the gun and the clip doesn't go in the right way around. So you turn it around, and then it's still the wrong way around. And then you turn it around again, and then it's the right way around.
And then the event clip type C, which can go in either way around. Everyone's happy. My first thought about this was, you could have something where like, how far you move the mouse that day is some kind of metric that's good. And then I realized, no, actually what I want is like, how little you move the mouse that day. I want a game where like, I get more and more points the less I use my computer and the less I move my mouse around.
Very good at keyboard shortcuts.
Cause I get RSI and so I should be minimizing my computer use and I need it for work. So, I got to do that. And I want to play games and I can play some on gamepad and some I need mouse and keyboard for. And what I really wanted to do is like everything else. Everything that isn't just me playing a game or me doing work. I wanted to tell me like how much I use the mouse and how much I, basically, injured my hands doing things that didn't fucking matter, like browsing Twitter.
RTSs have done this to a great extent, but I fucking love box selecting and things. And that is a good game mechanic. It's just a satisfying thing to do, to watch things highlight and, become under your control. And, RTSs have nailed this, but, anything that's just kind of built.
What if you could like box select all the icons on your desktop, then right click somewhere and they all march there?
Oh shit. Holy crap. Oh my god. Microsoft, you better be listening. Windows 11.
And the game tries to figure out how powerful that unit would be when the words involved in the name of the shortcut and the icon as well.
Recycle bin is fucking slaughtering everything. Everything's getting recycled.
Sucks everything in that gets near it.
Just like recycle bin is OP, man.
I should make this game. I feel like there's been games where they look at the files on your computer and they make some kind of game mechanic out of it.
Yeah.
What if defragging, but it's Tetris?
Actually, like, I use a program called Sequoia View, which has a visual representation of how much space all the files are taking up. And that creates this really beautiful looking, like, grid thing that feels like it has game potential. If you like, I guess, deleting a file in that would be this really satisfying thing of destroying that square and then the other squares like resized to fit it. If they're all like squishy physics squares.
In some ways, the forced surprise Windows update is the cutscene of computing. And so you should be able to press a button
illegal for sure
during a Windows update to make it go woo. That's what I want.
International regulations say this has to be in it.
Woo! And like that'd just give you that moment where it goes like woo, and it gets stuck, and you're like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
And then you have to reinstall from a restore disk. But that is again a form of cutscene. You have to press the button to say woo.
You come up with like a fucking sticky keys prompt.
Exactly. Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. Do you want me to woo constantly?
Yes.
Or only when you press shift?
That's what I demand from my operating system.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, you've activated constant woo.
Recycle bin has eaten all my life now, so I might as well just have woo.
Sticky woo.
What are we talking about? Next is Mitchell, who writes, Dear Crate and Crowbar, I recently finished work on a project to commemorate playing through The Witness with a group of my friends. I designed and painted a set of puzzle panels on square-foot canvases, which is my first foray into non-miniatures painting in decades. Also, I was recently inspired by some of the music in the Sea of Thieves beta, and I spent the last few nights trying to transpose hurdy-gurdy music to my dusty old piano, which I haven't touched in years. Journalism and development aside, how often do games inspire you to get in touch with your creative side? Keep up the great pods. Mitchell, Oxbait _ I must have said this before, but like my beginnings as someone who figured out that they wanted to write for a living started as like MMO fan fiction when I was like 13, 14. So that's a form of that, I think.
I think base construction in June 2. I used to really get into that. Just like not just like what an optimal construction of walls around this base on a little patch of rock surrounded by sandworms, but what would look the coolest and what would actually be like in the fantasy, the best kind of representation of an Atreides base on this piece of rock. Like just, to buy into a fantasy so hard on the thing that just looks so primitive now is one of the great delights of video games, I think. It's something that doesn't quite happen with other things.
Good answer.
It probably doesn't really count, but like, during the development of Heat Signature, to try and make the galaxies, I ended up just taking some sprites John had drawn and coloring them randomly and overlaying them on each other randomly using a mode called additive blending, which is where if you add two colors on top of each other, they get brighter, basically. And like drawing black on top of something does nothing. Drawing white on top of something makes it completely white. And if you draw a bunch of colors on top of each other that way, it looks awesome. It glows and it just looks really interesting. And so I made a little test project in the new version of GameMaker where sort of as you hold down the cursor and move it around, it's constantly creating sprites and coloring them that way. And it creates this beautiful, like, glowing, it's like a paint program, basically. You just create this, like, amazing glowing line. And I didn't really have an idea for a game, but I made it so that every time you click, it kind of picks a unique color for that, and then you draw in this amazing glowing color, and it stays there. But then as soon as you click with a new color, because it's not, instead of like painting a canvas, I'm actually creating like thousands of objects. Like all the time you're clicking, we're creating all these new objects all stacking on top of each other. That means that when you draw a new line, I can apply physics to them and they all get a force propelling them away from the new line you've drawn. So every new line you draw like pushes the other ones away and they kind of explode out of the frame. It just feels really nice. And there's nothing more to it. I can't think of anything else to do with this. It just feels really good to like, every time you draw a line, it fucking destroys the last line you drew.
What you've done is you've taken that crash that happened in Windows where your cursor will be infinitely replicated, and then you've added a physics element. And that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other than work related stuff. Like when I think games have made me want to cook more. Genuinely. I think that's, that's something that actually maybe has partly come from like The Sims or life games like that, where you kind of like look after yourself in a particular way because you have to, because that's the game mechanics. And it's like, this character lives better than me. Like, this character hasn't just eaten crisps. Like, and that can inspire you to, go and actually do more interesting creative things with how you take care of yourself. Which is broadly a good thing. Thanks, video games.
I like the way games trick you into think you're being creative even while you're actually exploring avenues that the developers have massively left you there. So, the best examples are stuff like Diablo 3, where, of course, the developers know you're going to combine, the whirlwind with this ability, but it still feels creative to discover. It's almost like the illusion of creativity. It gives you enough toys to make that happen. But it's not quite the same as, what was that DS game where you could just draw your characters?
Oh, Scribblenauts?
Scribblenauts. And even stuff like Spore, where Spore is super creative. Like, I don't know why Spore's in my brain today, but, that was kind of a cool, really cool creative tools for making monsters, and it would procedurally animate what the fuck you'd done. And it was often seemed cruel in some way that you'd made this thing, but it was still great.
That was amazing. It gets such a bad rep, but like, creating a creature in Spore is one of the most magical things in gaming.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Just you design this thing and then the game just says it would walk this way. Here's it moving around. Here's it trying to eat.
Yeah.
A final question comes from Simon, who writes, Dear Weighted Slow Bar, if such a thing were possible, presumably through some kind of transdimensional magic portal, which video game characters would you like to have guests on the podcast? Personally, I think I'd enjoy hearing from some of the great BioWare companions like Garrus, HK47, and Jolie Bindo. Many thanks, Simon. P.S. Despite the thematic fit, you can't have Gordon Freeman or any other silent protagonists for obvious reasons.
Sora's coming.
The issue here is partly like, obviously, fun video game characters to talk to is one thing. Video game characters that are specifically going to offer value to a podcast about video games is a slightly different consideration.
Kind of self-awareness is required, right?
I love, in Into the Breach, all the pilots have a different, personality, and there's, 16 or 20 of them. And I gather a lot of it is written by Chris Avellone. I don't know how much exactly, but I feel like at some point they were maybe reaching for a theme that they hadn't used before. And so there's like a robot who's really into gardening. And just almost everything he says manages to relate it back to gardening. And I'd like to have him on the podcast.
I think I'd quite like to have Andrew Ryan on the podcast.
That'd be good.
Because he's the only video game character I assume is drinking every time he's speaking. Like, there's, you know what I mean? There's a sort of like, you'd get a lot of monologues, you'd get a lot of like...
A host chooses, a listener obeys.
Exactly. That's never the way around it works. Like, yeah, exactly. Like, you'd get a lot of kind of like, brandy swirling monologues about whatever the fuck. Right?
No pods, no kings, only man.
Nice. You got there. The second one was the one.
Thanks.
I'd like Glottis from Grim
Oh god,
Fandango,
yeah.
who is, I don't know if anyone's played it,
Or
but
Manny, actually.
they'd both be great. As both on the same time, they've got that rapport. You can't buy that rapport. That's the thing. That's what podcast needs. So Glottis is an enormous, he would not fit in this room, that's for sure. Just an enormous orange demon. But I'd want to hear his kind of, clowny, everyman take on the gaming issues of the day.
Yeah.
I would take Sam, but not Max.
Is Sam the dog?
Yeah.
What is Max?
Rabbit.
Is it?
I think so.
Yeah. He's like a crazy little rabbit.
Okay. We could get into that, but that's not.
I'm trying to think.
Bit of Cain from Red Alert.
Oh man, that's also very good. I'm really into like the monologue-y villains. Actually, it's the best choice for this.
Brian Blessing on.
How about? No, that's dumb. I was going to suggest the helicopter pilot from Deus Ex.
Jock?
Yeah, exactly.
JC, a bomb.
Yeah, exactly. Just warning whenever a bit is really flagging.
Oh my god, Chris, a question.
A bomb, you've bombed it. This is bombing. JC, etc. I think we might have exhausted our creative potential stemming from video games. Feel free to shout during the outro if a dazzling podcast guest character occurs to you. However, you listening to this may send us a question by emailing us questions@crateandcrowbar.com or tweeting us at crateandcrowbar. You can also find us on YouTube at youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. And as ever, this podcast and its spin-offs is supported by our Patreon. Details for that can be found at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar. Finally, we may be found on Twitter as individual human beings. In principle, I am on there at C Thurston, which is CTHURSTEN, Tom Senior.
I'm there at PCG Ludo, which is Ludo.
And I, Tom Francis, am at Pentadect, PENTADCT.
Woo!
That's
This was